Hello, everyone, and welcome to Youth Climate Saves event. This time we are talking with Allan from Physicians Association for Nutrition USA. We're going to have a presentation on plant-based nutrition that we're really excited about. And I don't want to hold us back too much, but I just want to let us know that if you have any questions, if you have any comments, feel free to put that in the chat, whatever platform you're joining from. We also have Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So wherever you're tuning in from, feel free to put any questions and those will be addressed at the end. And Allan, I'm so excited to hear from you.
Hi, well, Lena, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to be able to spend the next hour or so with you. Climate Save. I'm a physician, a pediatrician, and I'm part of Physicians Association for Nutrition, and we are a global organization, actually based in Europe, in Germany, and I'm the lead person, point person for the U.S. And we are all about the nutrition medical science of plant-based diets, and that's what I'll speak to today. So I'll just go through things. If you have any trouble hearing me, let me know, or Lena, and otherwise we'll leave questions for the end unless there's something pressing, and that's fine too. That's my contact info, by the way. I'll show it at the end, so feel free to reach out to me anytime. Let me move my. There we go. So there's the outline of today's talk. So I'll spend a few. So this is mostly a talk about human health, and I will talk about climate and diet and some related areas, a wee bit about animals and ethics. But this is primarily talk about human health. So I'm first going to talk about lifestyle medicine, diet being a key part of that. We'll spend some time on climate and diet. I am not a climate scientist. I'm a physician scientist, and so I don't want to overcall my expertise there, but I do want to just acknowledge a few points and sort of the controversies in that area. Power of nutrition, which basically is nutrition is medicine, plant-based nutrition is medicine. I'll say a few words. I'm, as a pediatrician, aside from the general work that I do with PAN, I'm leading a program on what we call the first 1,000 days, which is the math works easy. It's pregnancy in the first 2 years of life. So that's 9 times 30, 270 plus 365 times 2 is 1,000 days. A few myths of vegan diets, micro and macronutrients, where do you get your protein from, all that sort of stuff. A word about docs and other clinicians, and at the very end, a very brief PSA from my organization, PAN. So here we go. First at the high level. So lifestyle medicine. Diet is a key part of lifestyle medicine. There are other attributes as well. So in terms of no guarantees in this life, some people can lead a very, very healthy lifestyle and stuff happens and get a chronic illness early. And some people can, have a lifestyle like Winston Churchill and make it to 90. So there is some luck of the draw, but clearly on a population basis, and as a scientist, we look on a population basis, following the attributes of lifestyle medicine has a dramatic population basis impact on living long and living well. Having a purpose in life, and I suspect that most, if not all, of this audience has that, is key. Having a sense of community, whether it's family, friends, colleagues, in person, a lot of virtual stuff for many of us, always, and especially the last year and a half. Stress management. I meditate, and that's been really good for me. I've been a type A person for a long time in meditation. I also work with a charity called Dharma Voices for Animals and spent some time with Buddhist monks and others, and that's been very healthy for me. Good sleep is important. Low ETO alcohol, low alcohol consumption, and obviously drugs of abuse. Exercise, and then what we'll spend most of our time talking about today is healthy diet, predominantly and ideally exclusively whole food plant-based. This comes from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. The URL is down below, and they're a terrific organization that, of course, speaks to lifestyle medicine. So the blue zones, and I'll talk more about this in a second. So these are areas around the world which are dispersed geographically. You can see from Loma Linda, California to Okinawa with we've got Central America and Italy and Greece, as well, and there's some other blue zones as well. So very, very different demographically, and what ties blue zones together is diet, interestingly. And so to define, and you can also, there's an organization called Blue Zones, and it's in your spare time worth taking a look at sometime. So blue zones are areas of the world, regions, where there's much higher longevity, an average lifespan at least 10 years higher than expected. On a population basis, from a public health point of view, that's huge. 10 years on a population basis is crazy huge. The highest percentage of centenarians, people over 100, much lower mortality for middle-aged people, and lower rates of dementia. And when one studies blue zones, what we find, geographically disparate, the demos are very, very different. And what's similar is a whole food plant-based diet. So the one blue zone in the U.S. is the Loma Linda, California area, and Seventh-day Adventists are a faith-based group that, at least per their traditions, are plant-based. Although, like any faith-based group, and I do some work with Buddhists as well. I'm not Buddhist, but people sometimes honor their faith in the breach, and we work to encourage more folks for whatever reason to become more plant-based. But at least half of Seventh-day Adventists are vegan, and maybe another half of the half are veg, and the rest are not. So it's a really great, from a public health doc point of view, it's a great public health study. So you can see nearly 100,000 people were studied, and from a medical study point of view, that's huge. So the next few bullets, no matter cholesterol level, diabetes status, blood pressure, or metabolism, if you control for all that, vegetarians and vegans have lower health risks. It's fairly dramatic. Data also shows a progressive weight increase when one moves from a vegan to a vegetarian to an omnivorous diet. Levels of cholesterol, diabetes, high blood pressure, metabolic syndrome, which is sort of kind of pre-diabetes, type 2, the same trend. The closer one is to being vegan, again, on a population basis, no guarantees in this world, the lower the health risk. For type 2, this is the common. When I trained in pediatrics, we used to talk about pediatric and adult onset diabetes. And because there are so many teenagers and even some preteens who have type 2, which is the sort of the diabetes of obesity, we now call them type 1 and type 2 in some ways for pediatricians, sadly. So type 2 diabetes, the prevalence in vegans and vegetarians, lacto-vegetarians, is half, again, dramatic on a population basis, half that of omnivorous folks. Even when one controls for all the socioeconomic and lifestyle, it could be people with a lousy lifestyle that are very poor. If they are vegan or veg, they have half as much type 2 diabetes, which is one of the biggest killers in the world. All right, let's talk about climate and diet. And I want to preface this by saying that, I'm a physician, a pediatrician. I've gotten pretty expert with adult clinical parameters around nutrition and plant-based nutrition, and something of a scientist, but not a climate scientist at all. So I do not want to overcall my expertise here. I'm simply describing a few published studies to make a point. So this is from the Center for Sustainable Systems, University of Michigan, and I chose this graph in part because they are not a vegan activist organization. They're pretty straight-laced down the middle, and so you can see, over here on the left, that so this is a CO2 per average serving, and beef, then cheese, then pork, pigs, then poultry, then eggs, then milk. Are the big six here. I don't have sheep or goat in this graph. It's their graph. And then there's this dramatic, so beef is, as you all know, cattle far and away from a climate point of view is the biggest animal ag problem. That's distinct from ethical perspective. And you can see cattle's the highest. All of the animal sources of food are high. And then when you get down to rice, legumes, carrots, potatoes, it just becomes asymptotic. I mean, it's a dramatic difference in CO2 per serving. So I put this slide together to make the point, again, I'm not a climate scientist, to make the point that you hear all kinds of stuff. And some of you are probably more expert than I am. So the question for us really is, what percent of greenhouse gas emissions comes from animal ag? So, one of the more credible findings, the UN FAO, just earlier this year, 14.5%. And I copied from the FAO website. It's a little eye chart here, so let me read it. Sorry on that. Feed production and processing. This includes land use change, and enteric fermentation from ruminants are the two main sources of emission, representing 45 and 39% of total emissions. So that's almost 85% of all emissions. Manure and processing, another 10%. The remainder is transportation, which is smaller. And so this also includes methane and nitrous oxide as well as CO2. And as you all know, molecule per molecule, methane and especially nitrous oxide are even much larger contributors to greenhouse gas emission than CO2. And methane is the principal gas that's produced from ruminants and flatulence and so on. There's a study, so the second bullet, World Watch, 2009, so that goes back a dozen years. And it was a credible study. It got a lot of cachet. And I must say, and I'm all about physician stuff, and I'm a scientist, but I was the executive director at a U.S. organization called Farm Sanctuary, which is a farm animal sanctuary, when this study came out, which said that 51% of all GHGs are based in animal ag. And so all of my colleagues were kind of going nuts in a positive way about that. Oh my God, the world has to know this. And I must say, as I've read that study fairly rigorously and looked at other studies, I think it's overcalled. And I think while they didn't make stuff up in that study, I think that they, sort of the lies, damn lies, and statistics, they took data and sort of leaned it in a certain direction. The New York Times, just 3 years ago, did a very good review. I don't have the citation here, but reviewed a whole bunch of studies and found 14.5 to 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from animal ag. And I think that's sort of a credible range. Again, I'm not the world's expert here. From what I've read, that feels about right. US EPA a couple of years ago said just 10%. It's an article in you may know of it, a credible environmental journal, Sustainability, just came out this year. The reference is there saying at least 16.5%. And then interestingly, as sort of the opposite end of my words again, lies, damn lies, and statistics, a study from animal ag folks out of Texas A&M said it was only 3%. And so I think that, I didn't read it exhaustively, but I think that they were making a point as well, and that's way too low. And as you know, most of the impact is methane and nitrous oxide, not CO2, from animal ag, obviously from transportation and factories and so on. It's a different story. But from animal ag, it's mostly methane and nitrous oxide, and it's mostly cattle. And again, some of you may know more about this than I do, but that's sort of the level of my reading and understanding of the subject. Here's one more graph. So here's a grain.org, which is a credible NGO, and they're not, again, particularly out in the ramparts trying to make a case. And so a little bit of a busy pie chart here, but on the left is all the non-food related emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see it's about half. And so they're saying animal production, that's the animals themselves, not my favorite word, but we know what that means. There's 11 to 15%. Deforestation, other land use, getting rid of gazillions of square miles of rainforest, to use that to graze cattle and to grow soy and wheat and corn and the rest, so that our folks can feed cattle and other animals, and then processing, transport, and the rest. So this pie chart from grain.org, again, a credible org, says when you put everything together, including transport, retail, so the stores, packaging, all of that, you can get to around 50%. Again, I would have to say the sciencey person me would say, well, and because I've been vegetarian for over 30 years and vegan for over 20, so I'm part of the fraternity. But I would say that if we, God willing, got to a place where everybody was eating a plant-based diet in the not too distant future, there still would be trucks, there still would be stores, there still would be transportation. So it wouldn't go. So, for example, this green slice wouldn't go to zero, but it would be less for sure. Okay, so a little segue now. Most of my talk will be about individual health, but I want to talk about public health measures. So antimicrobial resistance, which is a huge, huge problem in medicine. Over 70% of all antibiotics used in the U.S. and in Europe, the The numbers depend country by country. It's a little lower on average, but not much lower. Net EU. So over 70% of antibiotics used in the U.S. Are given on factory farms, given the horrible conditions that animals are raised in factory farms. It allows animals to be in those tight confines and have fewer of them die before they're brought to slaughter. That doesn't mean that 70% of all antibiotic resistance comes from factory farms. It simply says that 70% of antibiotics are used on factory farms, but presumably that's a significant cause of antibiotic resistance, which is a real public health problem for around the world. So, oh, by the way, pandemics. I made this slide up about a year ago, and as we say in pediatrics, there's been a virus going around the last year and a half, a really horrible virus. I would have to say, again, going out of my lane a little bit, but we can't ignore for COVID. We can't ignore the significant possibility that COVID came from the Chinese government's Wuhan virology lab. In general, most pandemics over human history come from humans being too close to animals, and so factory farming is a big cause of lots of the previous SARS and flu epidemics, pandemics, wet markets, which was the initial described cause for COVID, and of course deforestation, which brings animals closer to humans, and not uncommonly there are intermediate vectors. So bacteria virus might be on a deer, for example. It may then get to insects, and the insects get to us, and so on and so forth. And so the closer that we are to the more destruction of forest and rainforest that our species does, the more pandemics as well. Michael Greger, a colleague, I bow to him. He's a fellow of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. He's also on the board of Pan USA and the founder and head of Nutrition Facts. It's a very good place to take a look at. He says, if you actually want to create global pandemics, then build factory farms. Truth. All right, so to people, to individual health, power of nutrition. WHO, obviously a credible source. Quote, this is from their reports: if the major risk factors for non-communicable diseases, so non-infectious diseases, were eliminated, around 3/4 of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes would be prevented, and nearly half, 40% of cancer will be prevented. That's crazy huge, and around the world. And so in a global south, global majority countries, while food security remains adequate calories, a huge issue, more and more of the population, as per capita income rises, very quickly get the diseases of the West. China, usually. India, it's happening significantly as well. Brazil, and so on. Non-communicable diseases are preventable through effective interventions that tackle shared risk factors, namely tobacco, unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, and alcohol. So the usual stuff we all know. Diet. So it's a busy slide, but basically eat your fruits and veggies. So in each of the 4 categories, I don't have legumes here, but fruits, grains, veggies, nuts, and seeds. The top pictorial shows comparatively how much of that category we should be eating on adults on a daily basis, and the bottom is how much we actually take in. So this is Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. I think that's at University of Michigan. So this is U.S. data. Apologies for folks that are not in North America. But the average American adult eats about 1/3 as much fruit as is recommended. Way less nuts and seeds than as recommended. Way less whole grains, and veggies the least worst, but still more than a 2-to-1 negative ratio there. Okay. Must have slipped an extra slide in there. I hope that doesn't happen again. Okay. Infla-aging. So there's compelling, convincing evidence in the medical literature that animal products cause inflammation. And inflammation is the leading cause of chronic non-communicable disease. Whole food plant-based diets don't cause inflammation in that same way. And sometimes they're actually not just reducing inflammation, but reversing So a bunch of really bad diseases: Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, heart disease, hardening of the arteries, macular degeneration, MS, general increased morbidity and mortality, ALS, it's a horrible disease, insulin resistance, and then type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, cancer. So, it's a rogues gallery of bad disease. Um, and amongst the single largest the single largest cause is eating poor diet, not a whole food plant-based focused diet. So as I alluded to just a minute ago, there's not only does a whole food plant-based centric diet um, reduce dramatically inflammation and hence all of those horrible chronic illnesses, it also can reverse. So people that have had a heart attack, people with type 2 diabetes, when put on, and the literature for this on type 2 diabetes is extensive. Somebody goes from eating a typical crappy, quote unquote, Western diet and is obese, or at least overweight, and has type 2, to eating a whole food plant-based diet. Typically, there's a dramatic reduction in medication needs, and frequently, like half the time, something like that, the disease goes away. It's actually reversed. Hypertension, of course, and there are many causes of hypertension, high blood pressure. High sodium is one of them. One should be a little careful with if you're eating a vegan diet or a mostly vegan diet, but a lot of processed food. Look on the label. Try to, if you're young, you can get away with it if you're otherwise healthy, but still try to keep your sodium down. Rheumatoid arthritis, which is a disease of young and old, but it's an autoimmune disease, can be reversed in significant part by switching to a whole food plant-based diet. I also want to, in the interest of being accurate to the science, that while I would be happiest if no one ate any animal products at all, the medical literature is such that when one gets to reducing the amount of animal products from sort of a typical Western diet, reducing it by 85 to 90% or so, which is huge, that probably gives as much benefit as 100% reduction. So plant-forward diets, and for those of us that are plant-forward and not entirely plant-based, and those of us that encourage our friends, family, colleagues to be more plant-based, incremental change, plant-forward is good for your health as well. So plant-based meats. So what about all those? What about tofurkey and the newer Impossible and Beyond and so on? And it's also fair to say that the amount of saturated fat in the newer plant-based meats, Beyond and Impossible, is much higher. I mean, they're made to taste more like meat, and so they have a higher amount of plant-based saturated fat. While some vegan advocates will say, well, plant-based saturated fat isn't as bad for you, there's no scientific evidence for that. And so, when I eat plant-based meats, I usually eat the oldie-timey kind, like tofurkey and so on. The newer ones are better than eating meat, but probably not quite as healthy. But here's an interesting study. Just was published last year, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, AJCN, which is a Class A top tier journal in clinical nutrition, and the reference is there. So it's a case control study. So just a bunch of omnivores, half of them randomized. They all agreed. Went on a veg diet for 8 weeks with plant-based meats, and then 8 weeks of regular meat. Half ate the meat first, and half ate the plant-based meat first. And there were significant decreases during the 8 weeks. TMAO is a major trimethylamine oxidase, it's a major marker of inflammation. So you'll see if you just do blood tests on older adults on a population basis, the more TMAO, the higher the risk of heart attack. LDL is the bad cholesterol, and of course weight speaks for itself. So the folks that were on the plant-based meat, and again, this was Beyond. It wasn't the older plant-based meat. Did better. They had better markers. You really can't tell in 8 weeks ultimate health outcomes, but you can see these biomarkers. Interestingly, or at least interesting to me, the group that was randomized first to plant-based meat kept much of the reduction in TMAO, which is really a high TMAO is a really bad sign for risk of heart disease, when switched to regular meat. So there was some, so that's true, and there was some conjecture that the folks that started on plant-based meats, maybe their gut microbiome improved, and they were able to handle meat better. Not sure, but that's the speculation. So plant-based meats, at least per this study, out of Stanford, pretty serious place in medicine and otherwise, seems to have some benefits over meat. So I want to talk about, I'm a pediatrician, so just a few slides about the first 1,000 days, pregnancy, 270 days, and the first 2 years of life. So why do the first 1,000 days matter the most? So this is from the beginning of pregnancy to baby's second birthday, is a time obviously of rapid growth and development, what pediatricians and parents spend lots of time thinking about and trying to improve. The development of the baby's entire body, brain, body, immune system. There's a fair amount of evidence that having a good first 1,000 days can catapult towards a healthier life in general. Everything one eats and drinks when pregnant influence of the baby's health, obviously eating for two and all that, which is why good nutrition is so important. A plant-based diet can play a significant part in giving babies a healthy start in life. What is a plant-based pregnancy diet? Well, it sort of speaks for itself. Mostly whole, minimally processed plant foods, while some plant-based eaters, again, the plant-forward folks, avoid all animal products, no, obviously meat, dairy, eggs, or fish. Others enjoy these foods occasionally, and you can tell this comes right from some pan literature, my organization's brochures and so on. And so we make a real point to not sound like we're proselytizing, and so we'll use words like enjoy, so we don't shame people that are 90% plant-based, or anyone for that matter. That's, as you probably know, counterproductive. Since most nutrient needs, including many vitamins, minerals, and protein, increase during pregnancy, a balanced plant-based pregnancy diet means getting the proper number of servings from each food group. Well, that speaks for itself as well. What about babies and toddlers? Well, breast milk is best, and we all know that. If not, an iron-fortified infant formula is recommended, and those of us in pediatrics and dietitians recommend nowadays that breast milk or formula should be the only source of nutrition for the first 6 months of life. It continues to be an important part of the baby's diet for the first year and beyond. After starting solids, a plant-based diet, consisting of mostly minimally processed plant foods, one doesn't have to be religious about it. Fruits, veggies, grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, and the same commentary here that some plant-based families are entirely plant-based and some are mostly. Eating a plant-based diet and less highly processed and animal-sourced foods helps babies get the nutrients and antioxidants, which matters at every point in life they need for growth, development, and to reduce inflammation in the body. In addition, it can lower their intake of sodium, added sugars, saturated fats, and excessive calories, while reducing the future risk of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. It's interesting, sort of morbid studies. Well, one of the studies is morbid, but I was on the medical school faculty at University of Buffalo, and apologies, I feel like I'm talking in a New York minute. I did grow up in Brooklyn, so that's probably goes with the territory. But so there was colleagues of mine at UB, University of Buffalo, School of Medicine, had you couldn't randomize, but had 3 categories of children the first 9 years of life, from babies through 9 years of life, vegan, vegetarian, and omnivorous, and did a sonogram, so non-invasive study of the carotid artery, the artery going up to the brain through the neck, from the heart to the brain, which and when we get to be older, that's a key source of stroke. They found that there was more carotid artery thickness, the inner lining of the wall of the carotid artery, in omnivorous young children than in vegetarian and plant-based and vegan children. Also was a study many years ago. So, it was soldiers who died, who were killed in war, and so mostly men, mostly late teens, early 20s, and they had postmortems, and it was shocking to the pathologist who did this study. Obviously, a sad study, but there was a fair amount of gunk, carotid artery, in the carotid arteries, the coronary arteries, and elsewhere. A fair amount of lipid plaque in the arteries of teenage and early 20s young men. So it happens. It happens early. Is a plant-based diet safe for infants and toddlers and for children? And my last, I think my last comment here is a pediatrician. More and more, my own experience, more and more physicians who care for adults, while most aren't vegetarian or vegan and most have trouble strongly encouraging plant-based diets, many of them are sort of kind of bought in. They see all the morbidity and mortality from horrible lifestyles, starting with diet. In pediatrics, we see type 2 and some obesity. We don't see most of the morbidity, and we worry a lot about healthy growth and development. And so pediatricians tend to worry more about safety than morbidity and mortality from diet. And that's a broad overgeneralization. Actually, my group, we supporting a study at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, which will be published, hopefully, submitted for publication, hopefully published in the next month or two, looking at attitudes and blocks of pediatricians on plant-based nutrition recommendation. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is the lead professional group for American registered dietitians, states a well-planned plant-based diet is safe for babies and toddlers, and it can provide all the nutrients needed for infants to grow and thrive and throughout life. And then, like any diet, a plant-based diet needs all the essential nutrients, et cetera, et cetera. Toddlers are especially hard to feel, but if they're healthy, they're healthy. Don't feel, if one is a parent of a young child, don't feel like every meal has to be perfect. That's impossible. And it doesn't matter if the child is eating meat or plant-based foods. I listed 3 references here. The first one is from 2016, which is the position statement. It's the formal position statement of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics that says that vegetarian diets, vegan and vegetarian, are healthy throughout the entire life cycle. For those of us that are interested in healthy plant-based diets during pregnancy and throughout childhood, it's a book that just came out last year. It's Nourish. It's Nourish the book, and you can get it obviously like anything else on Amazon or other places. The Definitive Plant-Based Nutrition Guide for Families. Dr. Reshma Shah, pediatrician. Brenda Davis is Reshma's a Stanford pediatrician. Brenda is a Alberta-based dietitian who's amongst the world's experts as a dietitian in plant-based nutrition. And this is really a definitive book on pregnancy and children and plant-based nutrition. I am crazy honored that the two of them are part of Pan USA's advisory group on what we call Nutrition for Families, our program on plant-based nutrition from pregnancy through adolescence, which I note here in my third reference, which we're going to put a bunch of resources up on our website in the next few weeks. All right, so where do you get your protein from, right? I couldn't resist. I'm hardly the first person with a slide like this, but obviously, if you look at those animals who are entirely plant-based, they get their protein, and so it is. If one is getting enough calories, so average adult American, adult Westerner, 2,000 calories, maybe 2,400, something like that. Unless all you're eating are chips and Oreos and beer. If you're just eating a reasonably well-balanced plant-based diet, it doesn't have to be anything close to perfect or even that healthy whole food, which we of course recommend. You get enough protein, so you can't, except for people that have some bad chronic illness, GI or kidney and so on. It's if you're getting 2,000 calories a day and you're plant-based, you're getting enough protein. End of discussion. I'm happy to take more questions on that at the end. So, common myths. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but some people will say vegan diets are unhealthy. That's bunk. All vegans are healthy. That's not true. A lot of the, being mostly whole food plant-based probably reduces one's risk of a bunch of bad non-communicable diseases by 40, 50%, maybe as high as 75% for heart disease. So huge numbers, but no guarantees in life. Vegans are preachy. I think the few that are give us a bad rep, and it's it's for me, it's always about incremental change and not telling someone they're doing something wrong, and it's about asking questions, not being directive, and helping people move along slow but sure. Meatless Mondays and in public cafeterias and all the rest. It's about um, having lots of plant-based choices and having the plant-based foods be front and center and not in the back. Um, Vegan is white. This is a comment made. It's untrue, but mostly towards those of us in North America. It's um, someplace be there's someplace between 2 and 3 times as many on a per capita basis, African American or African Canadian vegans as white vegans. It's um, and while I might not be the single biggest woke social justice warrior in the world at this point in my life, I'm quite cognizant, and it's shocking to me that that's unknown. um, so African Americans, many more vegan African Americans than whites, just is. Um, and as I said earlier, another myth: eating a plant-based diet not healthy for pregnant women or children. Well, that's bunk. Um, so here's some of the key nutrients. I'm not going to go through each one in detail. Protein, you can't help but to get enough protein. Calcium, lots of green leafy vegetables and legumes and seeds and so on. It's not a bad idea. It's sometimes hard to if you're not eating a perfect plant-based diet to get enough calcium. And so having 8 ounces a day of a or more of plant-based milk that's calcium fortified is not a bad thing to do. Um, and it's worth looking on the label because the plant-based milks are widely divergent in the nutrients. Some have a lot of sugar in them, which I make a point not to buy those. And some have no calcium, and some have 35% of the RDA for calcium. So it's definitely worth taking a look on for protein, and particularly for growing children who are plant-based. Soy milk and pea milk are much higher in protein than the other plant-based milks. So one doesn't have to have a PhD in nutrition to be able to do this well, but a little bit of smart um, um, buying is useful. Iron matters. Iron is a real problem with toddlers, and it's also a challenge, of course, with women of menstruating age, and of course during pregnancy. And so one should be thoughtful of getting enough iron. Non-heme iron is non-heme iron is the iron one gets from plant-based sources, is better absorbed. Also, getting too much iron. People used to think the more iron, the more the merrier. Too much iron, which is a much bigger issue with people that eat, especially a lot of red meat, is inflammatory. And there's some evidence that too much iron can be carcinogenic. So everything in moderation. Non-heme plant-based iron is, in my view, is best. B12. So you can get B12 in some foods, yeast and so on, and some fortified foods. It's the for most people over 50, certainly over 60, it's hard to absorb B12, and vegans do have more trouble getting B12 than non-vegans. It is true. And I'm going to just get on my soapbox here for a minute or two, but I get asked all the time. Well, we used to get B12 in nature, and why do I have to have a supplement? And well, I live in Boston. I don't live in nature, and so I'm not getting my veggies out of the ground because B12 comes from bacteria. And but all the even healthy whole food plants that we eat have been washed and scrubbed, and most of the B12 from the bacteria is gone. So if you're not really careful about B12 in the food you're eating, take a supplement or just take a multivitamin. My view. Same with vitamin D, and that's not just for vegans; that's for everybody. I live in Boston. If you live in San Diego, if you live in Sicily, if you live in much of the global south, and your skin is exposed to sun much of the day, you don't need vitamin D. But if you live in northern climes for chunks of the year, get some vitamin D. And a supplement is not a bad idea. Omega-3 is sort of the healthy, omega-6 is the unhealthy one. And so, again, it's from flaxseed and walnuts and sort of list of the usual good foods that we we like to eat. Should people that are entirely vegan take an omega-3 supplement? I've been back and forth on this. Neil Bernard from PCRM, his point of view is, it probably doesn't hurt. Probably a good idea to do it. I've started taking an omega-3 supplement, but but on days when I'm having a lot of like flax and walnut with my oatmeal and that sort of thing, I don't on those days. What about soy? Soy is healthy. Everything in moderation. There's some people have worried about soy from an organic chem point of view is sort of kind of similar to estrogens. So does that cause issues around breast cancer risk and so on? There's great population studies from rural China, which shows that that women who started early in life on lots of soy foods and stayed on that diet have dramatically less breast cancer than women in the West. So there's really, if somebody is being treated for breast cancer, there's a bunch of different biochemical kinds, and obviously I'm not giving any medical advice about anybody's individual health, and one should talk to their doctors and research. But for an otherwise healthy population of women or men, soy is fine. Dairy, you don't need dairy, regardless of all of the lovely commercials from in America from USDA and the trade associations and so on. One does not need dairy for calcium or any other key nutrient. You can tell about supplements. While I don't think everybody has to have supplements if they're entirely plant-based, I'm not sort of morally opposed to taking supplements. And basically, eat a well-balanced, whole food, plant-based, centric diet, and make sure you're getting enough B12. Supplements easiest. And if you're living in the north in the winter, get some D. And that's most of it. Starting to wind down here. Just one slide about doctors, not so much dietitians, but physicians. So why don't clinicians support us more in plant-based nutrition choices? And I'm not hanging my colleagues. There's a bunch of challenges. Lack of training. When I was in medical school a million years ago, we had 2 hours in 4 years of nutrition training, let alone plant-based nutrition. And in most American medical schools, that has not changed in the last 40 years. Change is hard for clinicians, for patients, for everybody. Genetics, it's Darwin's fault. We evolved from scarcity. So, if most people in the Stone Age, they're lucky they lived to be 40 or 50, and the way people died, was infection or trauma, and starvation is amongst the biggest causes of death. And so sugar and fat and salt and all of that, we are programmed to crave that. So it requires resetting of our perspective. Physicians, like to cut something out or write a prescription for it, and don't have as much acumen about a prescription. Food is medicine. We need to have my colleagues train more in plant-based nutrition and answer patient questions. The practices don't have dietitians know a boatload about nutrition, obviously, and most docs, most physicians don't. And hopefully we'll see generational change. And I think last and not least, probably 95% of physicians in America, I'm not sure that's exactly right, but something like that, are not vegetarian or vegan. And so it's hard to offer personal anecdotes, whereas it's much easier about exercise and other activities. And most of us, most docs, like anybody else, sort of kind of feel like, well, I'm doing okay. I eat a healthy diet. I'm fine. When it is omnivorous. And so I think that's part of the challenge as well. Here's some useful sites. Too much to write down at once. Lena can certainly pass on my slides to anybody who wants them, or just email me directly if you like. But Nutrition Facts, that's Michael Greger's. Blue Zones I talked about. Lighter World helps people get on plant-based diets. Harvard School of Public Health, their nutrition source. PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I mentioned Lifestyle Medicine, Plantricians, another great group. Balanced is another great group that we work with, and they work on getting more plant-based choices into schools, universities, and hospitals. Wholesome Wave is more about plant-based choices in underserved, impoverished, and people of color populations. And my organization, Pan USA, and our global organization, Pan International. So my PSA from Pan, we engage health professionals, the general public, policymakers about the role of whole food plant-based nutrition in promoting good health and preventing and treating disease. We strive to make nutrition a key part of education, especially medical students who are very receptive and don't get much. We empower health professionals by providing evidence-based educational material, effective nutrition programs, and resources. We're building a global network of health professional scientists and clinical students, and we're also looking to bring together clinicians and clinical students to advocate for policy change. Another Gregor quote: "We should all be eating fruits and vegetables as if our lives depend on it, because they do." And here's my organization's contact info: Pan USA. Pan USA, contact us. Sign up for newsletters and stuff. The international website. You can just browse the sites, online resources, fact sheets, sign up, social media, et cetera, like any other charity. And for those folks interested in healthy nutrition during pregnancy and for infants, toddlers, children, and I'm spearheading this. So we have a global clinical advisory team developing a nutrition for families program, plant-based nutrition from preconception through adolescence, with focus on the first 1,000 days. And my contact info again. Feel free to give a holler anytime. And I think that's a wrap. So, Lana, thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. I think I've only received a few questions, and you've already answered some of them in the process of the presentation. But if anyone still watching who made it to the end has any other questions, I can add them in. And I saw that we just received one. It's saying, "I have a 10-month-old vegan baby who is now interested in eating foods she can pick up herself. What are some foods I can make her that she can eat on her own?"
That's a good question. It's really, most 10-month-olds are able to pick foods up pretty well. So as long, we in peds, what one shouldn't do is we worry about things that are small and slippery that can, as my mother used to say, go down the wrong pipe or be aspirated into the tracheas. So little slices of plant-based meats, small nuts, like peanuts, those are bad because they can be aspirated. Generally, I think that most, I guess part of your question is about a lot of the things that are easier to feed at that age are kind of in the mush that we feed with our 10-month-olds with a spoon, and they're too young to handle the spoon very well at that age. But cut up pieces of fruit. Obviously, fruits and veggies would be the main things that come to mind. And it's always fun to watch a 10-month-old or 12-month-old eating spaghetti, and so some of the spaghetti is plant-based, but the healthy chickpea and other plant-based quote unquote spaghettis that are high in protein, a little bit of sauce, and they can pick it up, and those are safe and fairly easy for older infants and toddlers to eat. And they get some in their mouth and some on their face and some on the floor, and it's the joys of parenthood. So, but the right size slices of fruits and veggies are what comes to mind immediately. So, thanks.
Thank you so much. And let me know if you have any other questions. Other than that, I will go forward with one of the most common ones that I get from Youth Climate Save members, which is around dealing with especially parents who are concerned about nutrition and health if they say, when they tell their parents that they want to go plant-based. So do you have any advice for what they could say to their families when they get concerned that they're going to harm their health by going to a more plant-based diet or fully plant-based?
Yeah, no, that's, the conversations are sometimes even more challenging with family members, and parents-in-law can be stereotypically one place, and sometimes harder than with pediatricians, the pediatric nurse practitioners, and the rest. More and more children's health professionals are, if not supportive, are starting to not be super resistant. I think that it's like, so first off, it's by pointing out that by being plant-based, the lifetime risk of non-communicable disease, the diseases that kill us all, um, heart disease, diabetes, stroke, cancers, um, renal disease, all the rest, decreases by 40 to 75%. And so having one start off young, have clean arteries, and be used to eating those kinds of foods, she or he will much more likely live a healthier lifestyle. Um, the That there is from in America, both the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the American Academy of Pediatrics, both say that plant-based diets at any point during the life cycle, including infants, is healthy. Um, and I think also pointing out that um, the other advice I would give is easy to say and it's hard to do because some of these conversations can be heated. Um, is to to listen and not this is going to sound patronizing, but try to avoid a fight. Try to go after somebody who's ticking you off, and answer questions in the form of a question. Sometimes can be less off-putting. Talking about, I hear you. We do pay a lot of attention to protein and calcium and iron, and I'm very knowledgeable about those things, so I think it's a conversation, and they're really except for the horror stories that one reads about in the press every once in a while, and it's always attributed to a vegan diet, but it really was some psychotic parents who were starving their baby or toddler. Yet, there's no evidence. I mean, there's huge evidence that infants and toddlers on plant-based diets are healthy. I mean, there's huge evidence. So, um, I mean, those are some of the things I would say, and I know it's been a long time. I have a 28-year-old son, so it's been a long it's been a long time. But when my father-in-law passed, my mother-in-law was challenging me about some of these things. I would say that I was less perfect than I'm describing in this conversation now. So it can be hard, but I think it's trying to avoid a fight, and that one is being attentive, one is listening, and that both AAP and AND, Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, advocate that plant-based diets are healthy, and those are some of the things that come to. Also, I think some of the we will have on my organization's website in the next 2 to 6 months a bunch of resources that will have the imprimatur, because no charity is really why I'm spearheading this piece. No charity is you'll see from PCRM and some others some pediatric plant-based stuff, but no one has really built a program, and we've seen that as a gap that needs to be filled. And so, at major risk of pushing my own organization, we will have some stuff up on our website in the next few months that you might find helpful as well. The very last thing, the book Nourish, which is a pretty long book, but if you buy that book, if you read parts of that book, if you keep it as a reference, if you give a copy of that to relatives who care deeply about the health of their niece, nephew, grandchild, and so on, that can be really great too. It's a great book.
Great. Just one more question. Well, maybe we have time for two more. So the next one I'd like to pass to you is about what to watch for. What are the key advice you would give in making sure that you don't end up being one of the unhealthy vegans that you talked about, and that you maintain your health?
Yeah, so it's eating a mostly whole food diet that's minimally processed. One doesn't have to be quote unquote religious about it. And when I go out to restaurants, I'm in sort of omnivorous restaurants, I'm not eating a whole food plant-based diet. And then when I go to veg restaurants, some of them are very all about life alive kind of places. Everything's super healthy, and some are more less healthy, and which I think is fine to do once in a while. We're not asking people to be monks in monasteries, and so it's everything in moderation. It's most of the time at home, being mostly whole food, mostly low processed kinds of food, and then thinking about a few of the key nutrients. Like I said, for women, especially with having menses, you should think about iron, think about calcium. Please think about B12 and D if you're not seeing a lot of sun, and that's pretty much it. And don't feel so. I'm beating that to death, but don't feel like you have to be perfect. I don't know actually that it's hard to study, but I've never seen evidence that somebody who's eats a nearly perfect whole food plant-based diet on a population basis is likely to be healthier than somebody who's 85, 90% of the way there. Just do it most of the time.
That makes sense to me. I think some flexibility is also makes it easier on your mental health and stress and things like that. We got another question I can put up here, which is around if there's any supplements that the audience member could give to their teenage son. He just had a major injury where he ripped his tendons from his hip muscle.
Yeah. So, so I am. I get anxious, like all physicians do, when they're asked about specific medical advice about individual patients. So I'm not really in a position to do that. I'm sure you understand. I mean, I think um, for teenagers in general, and perhaps for that kind of injury, being attentive to protein, to iron, to calcium, um, probably makes a lot of sense. Um, I'm as you can tell, I'm not opposed to a multivitamin. I'm not saying that's necessary, but it's not a horrible idea. Um, but that's probably as far as I would go here. So
No worries. Thanks for some of the
sure.
supplements that you discussed as well. And maybe one of the last questions I can squeeze in is around, and this is more a question for me actually. I was wondering why there we see so many of those discussions and reports coming out where they say that we need to transition to plant-based and that we need to move our diets in this direction, but then the exception is always small children and pregnant women. Why does it always happen that way? And what happens when you have, for instance, small children who are concerned about the environment, about climate change, and want to shift to a plant-rich diet? Why are they advising against that?
Well, it's wrong. I mean, there's a good amount of medical and nutrition literature, science based, that it's very clear that um, plant based diets are healthy during pregnancy and during early childhood. It's and so I think that many clinicians and other experts who aren't sort of deeply expert in this space but are asked for advice because they're doctors and so on get nervous. I mean, it's probably easier to mess up with a woman who's pregnant or a 3 month old than a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old. It's easier to mess up, so one has to be a little more thorough, a little more careful, and make sure one is getting the key nutrients during pregnancy and breastfeeding. Of course, there's a greater demand for calories, for protein, for calcium, for iron, all the rest, because one is eating for two. So people worry more about that with that. So it's not. So it's safe, it's healthy, it's better in the long run, and it also isn't like a magic wand. Just eat a plant-based diet and don't worry about things. You don't have to have a PhD in nutrition to be healthy, as a pregnant woman or a parent of a young child. But you should be a little attentive to some of the key nutrients without going crazy about it. And so I think a lot of doctors just get nervous because they're not going to see a pregnant woman and a 6 month old baby are not going to have a heart attack, and the risk of cancer is wicked low, as we say in Massachusetts. So whereas the risk of missing a nutrient is probably somewhat higher. So I think people overcall that, and just be a little attentive, and one is fine, which is true. I would also add that that's totally true for people that there's hundreds of millions of people in North America and billions around the world who eat omnivorous diets. Now I'm on my soapbox, sorry, and eat really horrible, crappy omnivorous diets, including during pregnancy, and feed their. I mean, I remember I remember seeing the parents put Mountain Dew in a bottle for an 8 month old. So that's sort of the extreme, right? But so it's not like vegan diets are. Oh my God, they're much more dangerous and they're much harder to do. And omnivorous diets, you don't have to think about it. Any diet, you have to be a little attentive during critical lifestyle stages, including vegan diets, but not exclusively so. Um, Sorry, that felt like I was on my soapbox, like I said, but it's true. Everything I said is entirely true. Um,
Perfect. Thank you. Is there any last messages that you want to say before we wrap up?
no, it's been it's been a pleasure, and I think that incremental change is huge. We all have all of us here, even if we have lack of privilege in some parts of our life, we have the privilege of, most of us at least, to being able to get enough calories, and we're not animals in factory farms. And if we can encourage others to eat a primarily um, plant-based diet, we are saving many lives, starting with our own species. And so don't be frustrated. Incremental change, and and there's between a 40 and 75% chance for all of us, if we eat a plant-based diet at a younger age, that we will live a longer and healthier life.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Sure.
joining us. And thanks to everyone who stayed until the end. This will also be saved on our Facebook and on our YouTube. So feel free to go back on this link if you miss anything. Thanks again.
It's a pleasure. Take care.
Thank
Have
you.
a good evening. The rest of your day. Bye now.